Hello, 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 and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle and triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. The Her Version platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from listening to other people's stories. Today, I'm speaking with a woman named Leah Carey. Leah is a sex and intimacy coach and host of the podcast, Good Girls Talk About Sex. This work was not an obvious life choice for Leah. Leah? Oh my gosh.
I respond to both. It's fine.
Growing up with an abusive father, she learned to be a very good girl. At age 42, life threw Leah in an opportunity to challenge old beliefs about her own worthiness, attractiveness, and desirability. Oh, I love that. Today, she works with people eager to explore new avenues of their sexuality and fulfill their greatest desires, like diving back into the dating pool after a long time away, having first-time queer experiences, investigating consensual non-monogamy, or learning how to communicate about kink. She is currently writing a memoir of her story of sexual healing. Welcome, lady. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Sabrina?
I am doing fantastic. I do want to mention to everybody that I was on the Good Girls Talk About Sex podcast a week or two ago. So highly recommend you to check out that podcast, and you can find out all the goodies about all the things. After we were done, I think we both agreed, and you probably get this all the time on your podcast, that you could just keep talking.
Oh my God, for hours and hours.
Yeah.
I actually interviewed a porn star the other day, and literally we could have talked for another 10 hours. It was just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it's seen as being such a taboo topic, but then once it starts unraveling, it's kind of forever.
Yeah.
There's so much, it's endless.
Yeah. And it's based very much on the same concept as your show, that this is women, well, I should say, people who are brought up as little girls plus transgender women. I shorthand that to women, but it's not actually accurate. Yeah. I interview women about their sex lives. And the point is that getting to hear other people's stories helps us to normalize what's going on in our own heads and our own bodies and our own fantasies.
100%. And I could totally see that, especially growing up with such a religious background, which so many people have that. And then, recognizing, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that was thinking all of these thoughts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So great. So I think your story is just so interesting. I love the intro on how it's we were not expecting to fall into this industry. Can I ask, before we even dive into the questions, can I ask what you were even doing before all of this?
I had a series of different pseudo career / jobs, depending on which one it was. I originally thought that I would spend my life in professional theater. I trained as an actor and director and ended up working professionally as a stage manager for a bunch of years. And I burned out extremely hard from that work and did a whole series of office job kind of stuff until I fell into a job doing website development. And then I left that because I absolutely hated it and ended up becoming a journalist for 10 years.
Wow.
And now I'm a sex and intimacy coach. So it was not a straight path at all.
Not at all. What was the journaling about? Or the journalism, sorry.
I worked for a daily newspaper up in northern Vermont, and I primarily did human interest, kind of stories, very much like this. Again, my whole life has been really focused on telling people stories and sort of getting below the surface. I am so uninterested in like the chit chat. Such an introvert, so that stuff just like blows right past me. But I love the deeper conversations.
Yes, I remember growing up, I had such I used to tell people that, like, I'm not a small talk type of
Mhm.
person, and I hate it. So I love podcasting because you get to, like, dive into, like, the actual questions that actually matter.
Yeah.
It's none of this, "How are you? How are things?"
I really, really don't care about the weather.
Yes. It's like, "What's the trauma that fucked up your
Right.
life? Let's talk about
Exactly.
that." We're diving in. We're diving in. Well, I so appreciate you coming on here. I had so much fun hanging out with you and all the goodness that you pulled out of me. But I want to ask, the first question that I love to ask my guests is just a general just round about what's the story that changed your life. So the thing that kind of pivoted a huge part of your life, and then what did you learn from that pivot?
I don't know how to answer this question without just giving you the story that we're here to talk about.
Sure.
So like you said in the introduction, I grew up in a home that was super confused about sexuality, that there was a lot of very odd energy around sex. And I can talk about that more if you want. Um, but the result was that I lived the first 42 years of my life very repressed. I thought that I was not allowed to want sex. I was not allowed to enjoy sex. So just like all of this bullshit in my brain. And at the same time, kind of behind the curtain, I was absolutely obsessed with the idea of good sex and great sex, and obsessed with like I thought I was supposed to be a good girl, but I was having very bad girl thoughts.
Yeah.
Um, and then when I was 42, well, I should say when I was younger, uh, like uh, 26, I think my father died, and he was my primary abuser. So his death freed me from the immediate abuse, but I had taken on his messaging so deeply that I continued his messaging to myself. Like he was no longer there, but I was continuing to run those tapes in my head. Um, then in 2015, my mom, who I was very close to, passed away. Um, and while that was a one of the most difficult moments of my life, it also provided me with an opportunity I'd never had before, which was to live my life without, or to at least explore myself without anybody else's voice telling me who they think I'm supposed to be, or who I've always been, or what I might actually want from life. And so what I did, here's the story. All of that is prologue to I sold her house. Like the great gift that she left me was that she owned her home. So I sold her house and took that money and said, I'm going to take a year to travel around the United States and figure out where I want to be next. I had been living in northern New Hampshire. There was absolutely no reason for me to stay there with her gone. So I like sell as much as I can. I put a little bit in storage and I pack the essentials into my 4-door sedan and I head out on the road with no plan, no idea where what route am I going to take and where am I going to end up and where am I going to sleep in 3 days? And just literally no plan except what am I going to do tomorrow? Um, and my sense of this trip was just like me exploring the country because I hadn't had a chance to do that before, and me figuring out where I wanted to land. And right before I left, a friend had asked me, how will you know when you've gotten to the place where you want to make your new home? And I had to think about it for a minute because I was like, that's a great question I've never actually thought about. And I replied, I want to be somewhere where I feel like I'm really part of a community because I haven't really had that in my life before. And she was like, that sounds great. But if you're not spending more than a few days in any given place, how are you going to know when you found your community? I have no idea. So I go out on the road, and I was absolutely not looking for this, for any of what happened. If I had thought that any of this might happen, I would have stayed in New Hampshire under the covers. I would never have come out because I did not believe that I was capable of experiencing what I did, which was a profound sexual healing.
Wow.
I traveled the country, and instead of like, I don't even know what I thought I would be doing, like going and seeing all the tourist places or whatever. I ended up traveling around the country and having these sexual adventures
Wow.
with different people, which I know sounds really scary. I was very careful. I was very, very careful. But I was, the first thing I did was go to a sex worker when I was in New York City. And she said the words to me that really opened the door for everything else to happen, which was, you're not broken. Because I had spent all of my life thinking that there was something profoundly broken about me.
Mm.
She says, you're not broken. I think what you need to do is just go have some experiences so you can learn how to get out of your head and have fun. And so I was like, cool, let's go have some experiences. But I still believed I was fat, I was ugly, I was unlovable, all of the things my father had said to me. And so then it became a question of, how do I challenge those notions? How do I put myself out in a way that allows me to see myself through other people's eyes rather than through my father's messaging? And I ended up spending about 6 months on the road. I got to Portland, Oregon, and I was like, I've been traveling for a long time. I need to just sit and be still somewhere for a while. So I was like, cool, Portland, that's where we're at. I'm going to spend 6 weeks here. And that was 5 years ago, and I have not left because I found my community.
I love that.
By the end of 6 weeks, I was already fully integrated into the community that is still now my home.
So you're saying that when you went on the trip, you had no intention of it turning into this.
None.
Then you're just hanging out in New York.
So, okay.
Like eating a bagel.
Like, schmear. I should see a sex worker.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's a little bit more right before I left New Hampshire, which is that I was seeing an amazing therapist. I absolutely adored her. And we were in our last session. She helped me get ready to take this trip. We're in our last session. She says, so Leah, like, you're ready. We have about 15 minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to, any little things you want to talk about before you go? And of course, I said the thing that I had not been saying for the entire time that I had been seeing her, which was, I don't really have sexual sensation. What can I do to fix that? And she, thank God, did not laugh me out of her room. She did not say, that's ridiculous. We have 15 minutes. Get out. Instead, she said, that's not my topic, my area of expertise, which God bless her for saying that, because there are so many therapists who do not have any training in sexuality and they try to do it anyway, and it's not great.
Yeah.
She said, but you're going to be on this amazing trip. I bet that while you're on the road somewhere, you could go see a sex therapist or even a sex worker. And I was like, oh, I've wanted to do that for years, but I didn't think that girls like me were allowed to. And what is girls like me? Who knows? It's good girls, or girls who, here's the thing that I was really concerned about, that because I was so fat and ugly and unlovable, nobody was going to want to have sex with me anyway. So why bother doing the healing to get to the place where I was ready to have good
Wow.
sex and nobody wanted it with me?
Yeah. Makes sense.
That was like a huge block for me.
Oh,
And it took a long time for me to realize, oh, all of that, that's bullshit. That is like, as soon as I open my eyes, there are all of these people who want to spend time with me and touch my body and all of that. But I couldn't see them because I so deeply believed that they didn't exist.
can you tell us what a sex worker is? Like, I think I know what it is, but
So, a really broad definition is a sex worker is anybody who uses their body in a sexual way to make money. So, in this day and age, that includes like webcam girls and certainly porn stars. It also includes dancers at strip clubs. Full service sex work is what you would what we used to call prostitution. Full service sex work is like full penetrative sex. But it's basically anybody who uses their body as an instrument to help people either experience pleasure or heal, like the kind of healing that I experienced. And I have all sorts of stump speeches I can make about how important sex work is and how deeply we should be supporting sex workers. They provide an incredibly important service that has been that has just been villainized for so long that we've actually begun to believe that there's something dirty about the work that they do, when honestly the work that they do can save lives. And I mean that quite literally. People who do not have enough touch in their lives can literally have things like the neurons in their brains don't fire correctly if they don't have enough touch, and sex workers can provide that kind of touch. It's miraculous. It saves lives. Okay, I will now step down from my stump.
what's so you weren't lying when you said it's an array. It covers an array of things. So
Yeah.
what did you go to the yellow pages?
Great question.
Like,
So when I was leaving on my trip, and my therapist had just said, maybe you could find somebody. And I had this group of girlfriends. We had a Facebook group. And I went to them and I was like, I feel really awkward asking this question, but I feel like somebody in this group will know the answer. I would like to like follow my therapist's suggestion, but I'm so tired of talk therapy. I've been doing talk therapy for decades. I really want somebody to touch my body. And I have no idea what I would look for to find that. And so, can anybody offer like a Google search term that I can use? And one of the women in the group offered me the term yoni massage, or there was something else she suggested. I don't remember now what it was, but yoni is the Sanskrit word for vagina. So, vaginal massage. I I searched that term. I found a lot of people who were really not going to be the right fit for me because I didn't want somebody who was like, I'm going to give you the best orgasm of your life, or, going to heights you've never, like the stuff that was overtly sexual was not going to work for me.
okay.
I found a woman who was talking in, um, more romantic is the wrong word, but her language was more sensual than sexual. And
Yeah.
I felt more comfortable with that. And when you have to, if you're going to go to a sex worker, you almost always have to do a voice verification phone call first, so they can hear your voice and make sure that you sound like somebody who's, sane and rational. So I did my voice verification call with her, and we ended up talking for a long time, because she wanted to know what I was dealing with. And during that call, she told me that she had actually trained to be a doula or a midwife, something to do with childbirth. And she ended up leaving that work because she discovered that so many women had so much pelvic trauma that it was making childbirth incredibly painful for them and all sorts of complications. And so she wanted to go into work that would help to begin to relieve the pelvic trauma so that birth would then become easier, which just happened to be exactly the work that I was looking for, which was help just figuring out what the hell was going on in my body. Yeah.
Can you tell us what pelvic trauma is?
So yeah, absolutely. So there are a few different things that can happen. There's sexual assault, which obviously is going to cause trauma to the reproductive areas, to the vagina, and then all of the organs in that area. So that's one type of trauma. There's the type of trauma that I experienced, which was that most of my father's abuse was verbal. It was about sex, so it's still sexual abuse, but it was verbal sexual abuse. And that caused me to clamp down, to clamp every part of my body down, which ended up manifesting as some kind of pelvic trauma. And then there's also this sort of, and this is not exactly trauma, but the results of just using our vagina in the ways that it is used. Like, if you're somebody who really enjoys rough sex, you're getting pounded a lot. If you're somebody who gets penetrated when maybe you're like, whatever the situation is, maybe you're having sex because your partner wants it and you're not super into it, or maybe your body just doesn't generate a lot of lubrication and you're not using external lube, whatever it is. If you're getting penetrated a lot when your body is not lubed and ready, that can cause pelvic trauma. There are lots of ways it can happen. And the way that this woman explained it to me is that, when you get a tight muscle in your neck, you go to a massage person and get it massaged out. It spreads out the energy from that muscle so that it can all just sort of disperse, the knot can disperse. We have a lot of stuff going on in our vagina, in our vaginal canal, and that can create a lot of knots. Again, rough sex, assault, whatever it is, our vaginal canal can get really torqued up, but nobody ever goes in there to massage it. And so part of her process is to massage the internal canal so that you then have some movement and some relaxation in there.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
How does is this like the doula, the woman that you're talking about, was having conversations with this woman? Can she physically see it? Is there issues with the baby coming out? Like, how does she?
That's a great question. I didn't ask her any of those questions.
Wow.
I don't know.
I have something here that's coming up in the comments,
Mhm.
and I don't know if this is do you know what this is? Keely reading?
No, I don't know that term.
I was thinking maybe it was Kegel or something. Okay, no
Mm.
worries. Very, very interesting. So I'm assuming there was some nerves when you met up with her.
Oh my God. I was terrified out of my mind. I I was like, I got there a little early because, I didn't want to be late.
Yeah.
And so I got there like an hour early. And I went and I sat in like a Whole Foods across the street, and I didn't want to really eat much because I didn't want to upset my stomach. I thought I'll get a little thing of rice at the hot food bar. And I sat there like eating my rice, my plain rice, and watching people around me and thinking, can all of these people tell that I'm about to go see a sex worker? And then I go to her building and I have to like see the doorman because this is a, an apartment building in Manhattan. I have to see the doorman and I'm like, can he tell what I'm about to do? And I almost walked away. And then she buzzes me up and I get to her door and I'm like, am I really sure that I want to knock? I'm not really sure. Oh, I was terrified.
Wow.
And I will say that every new experience that I had on this journey, I was terrified. It wasn't like it got easier. It did not. I ended up having progressively more fun when I, the scarier places I put myself into, but it never got easier. Never got less scary.
The second person that you saw, did you decide to see somebody similar so that it was at least like you kind of knew what to expect, or did you just go on a totally different spectrum?
So she said, go out and have experiences. And so I started turning the dating apps on when I was in different cities. The first person was a guy in Washington, D.C. We went out for, coffee one evening. We sat and talked for quite a while. And he had a meeting in the morning or something. He had to leave, but he said, I'd like to see you again while how much longer are you still here? And so we agreed that we would see each other again a couple nights later. The next night, I'm like lying in bed in the hotel room, watching TV, eating chocolate mousse that I had gotten, while I was out. And he starts texting me. And we're getting into like some hot and heavy texting. And I'm like, do you want to come over? And I had this whole conversation with myself, like, am I okay having sex with somebody who I don't really know on the second date, who I'm maybe never going to see again? Because I'd really never done anything like that. And I was like, does this make me a bad person? He ended up not coming over that night. And I talked to a friend the next day, and she was like, so I asked her, would it be a terrible thing if I had sex with somebody on the second date who I'm never going to see again? And she said to me, I'm really curious that you asked, would it be a terrible thing, and not, would it be fun? And I was like, oh, wait, total mind blowing.
Yeah.
So he was supposed to text me and, make plans, and I hadn't heard from him. So I went into the dating app to text him and say, hey, are we getting together tonight? And he had blocked me. It was,
How did that feel?
oh, it was devastating.
Wow.
It was one of those massive moments where it was so devastating.
Yeah.
And I sat in that devastation for a day, at least, maybe more. And then I started thinking about it. Like, what did I do wrong? Why didn't he want to see me again? And I thought back on the messages and what had happened. Like, what did I say wrong? And I realized that the last message he sent to me was, I don't remember exactly, but something like, good night, beautiful. See you tomorrow. I hadn't said anything after that. I didn't do anything wrong. Something changed on his end.
Yeah.
Maybe he was married and his wife came home, or maybe he decided he couldn't have a one night stand. Whatever it was, something changed on his end. It didn't have to be about me.
Yeah.
That was a major turning point for me.
Yeah. Definitely. I love that you're viewing it that way, as far as maybe he didn't want to, because there are, like, I went on several dates through dating apps, And I genuinely wanted somebody who wanted to be in a relationship, not somebody who wanted to be in a one night stand. So anybody who would come at me that aggressively would immediately get blocked, just because that's not what I was looking for.
Sure.
So I love that you're saying that, because, and my fiance, who I've been with for 4 or 5 years now, I met on Plenty of Fish. I met on a pretty low budget dating app, actually. But I had like my rules. He was looking for somebody genuine. I was looking for somebody genuine. So he could have been one of those people who was like genuinely looking for a somebody who was looking to go long term versus a one night stand.
Yeah.
So I love that you left that open for an option. So what happened next?
So then I was traveling, and I think the next thing that happened was, I was in some city in the Midwest, and I was like at a Panera or something. And this couple walked in and sat down next to me, in that little seating area by the fire. And we just randomly started chatting. And I remember thinking, oh, there's an interesting vibe going on here. I wonder if I'd be interested in seeing a couple. And I was like, yeah, I think I would be. I think I really would be.
Wow.
And so, and that was not an appropriate conversation to have with them. They just were the ones who's triggered the thought for me. So I knew I was going to be spending a week or 10 days in Boulder, Colorado, because a friend was going to come in and meet me. And so I went on to Craigslist Personals, which unfortunately no longer exists. But I started looking for couples who were posting looking for a third. And I eliminated 95% of the listings because they were just, come suck me off while my girlfriend watches. Like, no, thank you. I'm so not interested in that. But there was one couple who seemed really genuine, and they wanted what I wanted, which was to explore, and they seemed really kind. And so I had a date with them. I had a date with them one night, and then I had like a sex date with them the next night. It turned out that the woman, once in the situation, realized that she was really not into women. So that was a fairly uncomfortable situation to be in, to be like, oh, I'm your guinea pig, and you just decided you don't like me. Well, that plays into all of my old stories.
Wow.
And then I know that I'm skipping a lot of stuff because I don't remember everything off the top of my head, but I got to Portland, and in my 6 weeks, my so-called 6 weeks here, I was like, I'm just gonna, this is what I'll do while I'm in Portland. While I'm not traveling, I'll just go on dates and see kind of what happens, which is how I found my community here. But I did go on a bunch of, for some reason, I just got really hooked into this idea of couples. And so I went out on a bunch of dates with couples, had several more experiences that were, it's a challenge to find two people where all three people are equally attracted and interested in each other. It's a special dynamic when it happens, and it did not happen right away.
But you just kept putting yourself into that situation.
I did. I was determined. I don't know why. Like, I don't know why I was so determined for couples, but the outcome was that I met a couple where I was not interested in her, but I was very interested in him. And they were very open about the fact that they were non-monogamous and that they dated separately. And so I asked him if he would be interested in like having some sexy dates. I said to him, I have the feeling that you're the kind of person who can really help a woman to kind of find herself and experience herself. Would you be interested in doing that with me? And he said, yes. And again, the first date with him was so transformational for me.
Wow.
Because basically he came to my hotel room. We got naked and he was like, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, I don't know. Like, what are the options? And he started touching me, and I was having all of these sensations, all of these feelings that I had not had before, because I felt really safe with him. And I
Wow.
realized I hadn't felt safe with almost any of my previous sexual partners. And then I was finally relaxed enough that when he said, "What do you really want?" I was willing to build the courage to actually say what I wanted, which was, I don't want to touch you until, like, I don't want to interact with your penis until I'm ready. I don't want to feel like I have to go down on you because it's now my turn. I want to wait until I'm ready, and I just can't wait anymore. Is that okay? And he was like, "Of course that's okay." And so we played and we played. And finally, at some point, when I was starting, like, I was getting into my head, and I was like, he's been paying attention to me for a really long time. It must be getting to be my time now. Like, I'm going to have to do this thing. And he stopped and he said, "Would it be okay with you if I touched myself while looking at you?" Which was really confusing to me, because I was like, "Well, I'm fat and ugly. Why would you want to look at me?" And he's like, "Oh my God, you have all these curves. You're so beautiful. Like, I love your hips and your boobs and your ass." And so I said, "Okay." And after a couple of minutes, I got really squirrely, because I was like, "I'm supposed to be doing that for you. Like,
Yeah.
this is not okay." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, honey, that's what consent means.
Wow.
We don't do something if you don't want to do it." And, like, that was another one of those just mind exploding moments. How did I get to my, early to mid 40s and not know what consent means? Just believing that consent means not saying no, or consent means, well, I said yes a few minutes ago, so obviously it's a yes now. Or consent means I said yes to one thing, and so everything that happens after that is a yes also. Everything in me changed. I mean, it took some time for me to really integrate that into me, but everything changed for me when I began to understand that what I thought was consent was not consent.
Wow. I can totally understand what you're saying. I've never really thought of it that way either.
Most of us haven't,
Yeah.
because when we're brought up as little girls, we are trained to take care of people,
Yeah.
to make sure everybody else's needs are taken care of, to make sure that the other person is happy so that we don't get in trouble. Because if we don't make the other person happy, then we might physically be in danger. Why would we be taught to think about consent in this way?
Yeah. How many more times did you meet up with him?
A small handful, maybe 2 or 3 more times. And then, he stopped responding to my messages, or, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I did not go into any of these things expecting to have a relationship. I went into them expecting to have experiences, and I got that. I I got what I was looking for. And there were times I was disappointed because somebody disappeared before I was ready for them to, or whatever. But I, yeah, it was an amazing time of my life. It
I
was so much
just so
fun.
love your outlook on this because there's so many women. I'm in a lot of, 40 and older women Facebook groups. Um, and whenever the subject of dating apps and single groups too, single mom, single mothers, that type of stuff, whenever the subject of dating or dating apps comes up, it's this whole thread, hundreds and hundreds of comments of just negativity
Yeah.
of it not working. And I always chime in with my experience because my experience with the dating apps was phenomenal. Was it all perfect? No. Was there some letdowns? Yes. Were there people that didn't call back? Yes. Like there's all the ups and downs, but your experience here, my experience is like, that's just part of it.
It's part of it. Dating apps are always going to be a numbers game.
Yeah.
Like that's just the nature of the beast. But I think what is most important to having a successful experience on a dating app is to be 100% clear about who you are. Because if you go on a dating app trying to make yourself the best, like all bright and shiny and like who you think everybody wants, no matter what, there's going to be a letdown
Yeah.
when you meet the other person in real life. Whereas if you go on, and I'm not saying like share all your trauma, like I'm not saying lay everything out, but I am saying like if you are, let's say you're somebody who wants to play in the kink world but hasn't had that experience, or you're somebody, this is a question I get a lot. I'm bisexual and I want to have experiences with women, but I'm not really sure how to, yes, authenticity is the key. I'm not sure how to make that work. Like if I say that I want to experience a bisexual experience with a woman, are people going to reject me? No, you're actually going to find so many other women who want that. But you have to be upfront about the fact that A, you want it, and B, that you're new and you're exploring so that you don't attract, for instance, because this happens a lot, someone who identifies as a lesbian and is looking for a long-term relationship with another lesbian. And then you show up, you don't really fully let them know that you're experimenting.
Yeah.
And then you're like, you know what? Not for me.
Yeah.
And then you leave. And that's how bisexual women get such a bad rap with lesbians, because there are so many women who are experimenting with lesbians when they should be experimenting with other bi-curious women.
Wow, totally makes sense. Now I'm going to ask the question that I'm sure everybody asked you. Weren't you afraid of all of the repercussions that everyone is scared about with?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why I put a really pretty serious safety protocol in place for myself. I would not meet somebody in person unless I had pretty fully vetted them. And what that meant depended on the situation. If I had spoken to them on the phone, then just like the voice verification with sex workers, I have a pretty decent, sense intuition. So I like to talk to people on the phone first, to get a sense of who they were. If I was going to meet them, I would always be in a public place, and a populated public place, not a bench in a park. I wanted to know either their full name or, and the car they were driving, some identifiable information that I would then send to a couple of my girlfriends. Ideally one in the same time zone I was in. But if not, then I would send it to a couple of people, because most of my friends were on the East Coast. And then I would give them a time that I would check in with them, so that if they hadn't heard from me by then, they would take that information, to check up, to run that information. There were a few other things. Like I was very, very careful because, yeah, I'm a woman traveling by myself in places I don't know, where I don't know anybody. I had to be careful.
Yeah. And
I never let anybody know where I was staying unless I was already like, yes, I've met you, we've talked, I'm confident that this is okay.
Yeah, I think it's so important to always tell somebody who and where. Yes,
Yes.
people don't do that.
I know.
I always did that. I sent a text with where I was and as much information about them. Even sometimes took like a little picture.
Oh, totally. And
Yeah.
if I could, and I would go, like, I am a pretty good internet sleuth. I would find out whatever I could about them before I went out with them too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super, super smart. Definitely. So this crazy awesome adventure.
Yeah.
And then you're hanging out in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon. And then you're like, let me be a relationship sex.
Yeah.
What happened?
So it all happened very organically. I was not looking to do any of this. I had trained to be a life coach. I'd gotten that certification like 10 years earlier. So that was sort of in my tool bucket, but I'd never done anything with it. And when I was traveling, I continued communicating with this group of girlfriends, the Facebook group that had originally led me to yoni massage as a term. I was writing my experiences. Every time I had one of these crazy experiences, I would write it for them.
I love that.
And at first I was like, is this TMI? Do you know? And they were like, tell us more. Tell us everything. Give us the details.
Yes, I would have loved to have been in that group.
Well, that's the material that I'm using to now write my memoir.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I was recording it in real time, which is great. Anyway, as I was sharing my story with these women, they started sharing their stories back with me, sometimes in the group, sometimes privately. But I realized this opening up process that I was going through was allowing them to open up. And that the more I was getting to have those conversations, the less I wanted to do anything else. I was like, just let me talk about sex all day. This is the most fun I've ever had. And that was the origin of my podcast, Good Girls Talk About Sex. Literally just having those conversations that you have with your girlfriends at midnight over a bottle of wine when, the kids are away. And then sort of as part of that, these girlfriends started asking me questions like, and part of the time I was like, I have no idea, but I've met a bunch of people. Let me ask them. And then I would get to learn. I was also, once I got to Portland, there's an incredible group here called Sex Positive Portland, where I started taking every class that they offered. So intro to kink and, consent and boundaries and all of these like kind of basic building blocks. And so I was able to start sharing that information that I was learning. And the more information that I shared, the more questions they had. And that's when I was like, oh, there's a need for this. There's a need for this kind of information sharing and coaching and like helping people to move through the same kind of shame that I had been so lucky to move through myself.
Yes.
So that's how I became a coach.
I love it. I love it. And I love it that you have so many different like relatable experiences to just normal people, where like some were total flops, some were real good. And that's like what we need. We need someone who is a plethora of all the things to be able to relate to.
Yeah. It's definitely true that I had plenty of experiences that left me devastated in the moment, but I never once had an experience that I didn't learn something from. Whether it was, I never ever want to do that again.
That just reminded me of this guy. I had a crush on this guy since I was probably like 15 years old. Wound up connecting with him when I was maybe 30. I don't know. I was on a break with the guy I was seeing, maybe like 28, 30. Went on a few dates with him. And I was just like, oh my gosh, just my childhood dream is happening. I felt like Ashton Kutcher marrying Demi Moore. like for real. I couldn't even believe this was happening. So anyways, we went on maybe 3 or 4 dates, went back to his place at one point, started making out, taking off our clothes and stuff. And we're in the middle of the act. And he jumps up mid-act and he goes, I can't do this. I'm in love with Gina.
No.
Yes. the most vulnerable that you could possibly be. It's not like it was like, you know, it
Right.
was like, I'm just lying there.
Yeah.
And it wound up like his ex-girlfriend, she had dumped him a couple months before. He still wasn't over her. I didn't even know this. He didn't even like tell me any of this. We had just connected, hung out a few times. I was so devastated. And then he's just literally like, you got to go.
Oh my
It
God.
was horrible.
Oh my God.
It was horrible.
I have, that just reminded me of a story. Do we have time?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. So when I was in college, I had a huge crush on this guy, who had a girlfriend who he'd been with for a couple of years. And he and I would spend a lot of time together, and like we took theater classes together. So we like did all this touchy-feely stuff. And then at some point he breaks up with his girlfriend. And I'm like, huzzah.
Yeah.
And so we get together one night and we kind of make out a little, but I was so freaked out, like, because again, totally sexually repressed.
Yeah.
I just was like, I froze. And so he left and I cried for days. And he ended up getting back together with his girlfriend. And then saying to me, oh, but like we could make out just this once if you wanted to. And I was like, I am not that girl. Like, no, if you have a girlfriend, no. And then he and I, like, there was this very weird tension between us for the rest of the time that we were both there.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, it was sometime while my mom was sick. So maybe around like 2014, 2015, he out of the blue emails me. And he's like, hey, I was just thinking about you. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so great to hear from you. What's going on? Like, how are you? You know, are you married? Do you have kids? And we start this very flirtatious text messages, but he never answered the question if he was married and had kids. And so finally I like called him on it. And I was like, you are not answering this question. What's the deal? He's married to the same woman he was dating back then. I got into the same goddamn love triangle twice.
Wow. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, I was so pissed.
I would be too, for sure. Looking back, it's been a journey for you, and we're not dead yet.
No.
But up to this point, what would you say is the number one lesson that you've learned about life?
So, I mean, this is focused on sex, but I think that it is truly, it can be expanded to all areas of life, which is that there are people who want to love us exactly as we are today.
I love that.
I don't care if you think that you're so fat that no one will ever look at you. It's not true. And I have empirical evidence for this, which I will give you in a moment, but let me just like, if you think you're too old, there are people who want to love you. If you think that there's something just desperately wrong with your personality, there are people who want to love you exactly as you are today. Not a year of therapy from today, not 50 pounds of weight loss from today, not a facelift later or a boob lift later. There are people who want to love you exactly as you are today. And here's how I can say that with such complete confidence. One of the things that I did was, this is crazy. I booked a 5-day trip to a Jamaican sex resort by myself. Yeah.
Jamaican
sex resort. Yeah.
Okay.
When I go all the way.
Oh my God.
I ended up not having any sexy adventures there, which I was actually totally fine with. Instead, what I did was I found my favorite hammock. I brought a bunch of books with me, and I just laid naked in this hammock reading for 5 days and watching people walk by. And I I was still at the point in my journey where I expected people to come up to me and say, "We don't want to see that. Go inside, put your clothes on. Like, put that away. That's not what we do here." Never once happened. What did happen was I experienced people looking at my body with heat and desire, people of all genders. I also saw all of the other women, because I'm obsessed with my body. So I'm looking at all of the other women's bodies and comparing it to them. And there were a few like bikini model types, sure, but they were not the majority. The majority were women with totally regular bodies, just like mine, size 16, got the rolls, got the cellulite, all that stuff. There were also women there with, if you're familiar with the language of the fat acceptance movement, there are women there all the way from like medium fat to infinifat. So like extremely large. Every single one of them had somebody looking at them with desire.
Wow.
I can tell you with absolute certainty, there's somebody who wants to love you in the body that you're in today. And I have to believe that that extends to every other part of ourselves.
Yeah. 100. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to take a moment to acknowledge those watching live. Thank you so much for being here and hanging out with us. And for those of you that were commenting here and there. For those of you watching on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay at this point so we can see where you are and we can send you some love later on. I want to ask, what do you do for work exactly?
Yeah.
And how can people find you?
Yeah. So I am a sex and intimacy coach. Oh, thanks, Lindsay. And what that means is that I work with individuals and couples. Awesome. The podcast is called, I'm getting out of order. I shouldn't be responding right in real time. Thank you. So I'm a sex and intimacy coach. I work with individuals and with couples. And if you're in a non-monogamous situation, I can work with more than two people, to really look at what your desires are, to look at where are you getting caught up? Like, what are the things that are keeping you from being able to identify your desires? Because many of us who are brought up as little girls don't even know how to identify what we want or how to even think about what we want. And then once you know what you want, how do you actually speak it so that your partner can hear it and you can actually get what you want? Like, there are a bunch of moving pieces in that process that are really scary. And so that's a big part of what I do, is help people figure out what they want and then how to talk about it and get it. I also, like you said in the intro, I work with people who are just beginning to explore kink, people who are potentially wanting to open their monogamous relationship in some way, people who are wanting to have first-time queer experiences. What I really love is people who are exploring new aspects of themselves. My goal is to help you understand that what you want is totally normal. There's nothing wrong with it. And how can we help you get it?
Yeah.
So that's coaching. You can find all of that information at leahcarey.com. And then the podcast is Good Girls Talk About Sex, where I interview people about their sex lives, their relationship histories, their heartbreaks, their trauma, the whole kit and caboodle, starting really with how did you learn to masturbate, which is something you basically don't ever hear two people talk about. So you can find that at goodgirlstalk.com or on your favorite podcasting app.
I love it. Why do you do what you do?
Because I needed it so badly. I needed somebody to be doing this work 10 years ago. I am incredibly grateful that I got to go on the journey that I did. But there could have been more. Somebody could have eased that path for me if they were doing what I'm doing now. And I feel really passionate about helping others in that same way.
I love it.
I also believe that if we're all having better sex, then we're all going to be basically happier people, which means there's going to be less trauma and chaos in the world. So, like, better sex is good for our planet.
I'm definitely going to agree with that. And I also feel, even just with you saying that right now, the first thing that popped up into my head is just this whole stereotype of men liking sex more than women. And I really feel like and this isn't necessarily for me because I'm good. However, mixing past relationships along with just what I've heard from friends and when it comes up with clients is if the men were like doing it in a more according to what we need or what we want, then we would want it more.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And the way that ends up coming across so often is men are terrible. Like, men just don't pay attention. And it's not actually true. Men desperately want to be good at sex. We have not given them the tools to be good at sex. We have, just like we as little girls have been trained to not have needs and desires and take care of everybody else. Our little boys are trained to be strong, to never ask questions, to always have the answer. And that precludes them from getting into the bedroom and being like, okay, what do you really want? They're just supposed to know and do it. And so they get so used to knowing and doing it that they're not actually seeing the person in front of them. Yeah. It's all the messaging that we got as kids. None of this is about women being good and men being bad or vice versa.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it does come from, voicing that we could alter that is the nervousness that I remember feeling in even voicing or saying the things that I wanted, because if I said something that was a little too naughty, then that was bad.
Yes.
I'd be a bad girl or I'd be slutty or whatever that was. Yeah. So then not wanting my partner to necessarily view me that way or use it against me, yes, or thinking that I was like learning new things or cheating or whatever else. Yeah. So then we stay quiet. So then it's this horrible, crazy cycle that we end up being in, and nobody's getting what they want.
That is exactly the truth. Yeah. And I know that you grew up in a particularly religious situation where all of that was amplified, but that cycle that you just talked through is exactly what happens for people, regardless of their religious upbringing.
Yeah.
It's a big part of what happens.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I so thank you for coming on. I would love to have you on again.
Absolutely, anytime.
To talk about all the things. I think the coolest thing about meeting you and talking to you is recognizing the plethora of angles or conversations that could be had in this genre that I don't even think about,
Yeah.
I never really read Cosmo growing up because it was, not really kosher with that. And, there's so many, from just sensuality to kissing, to touching, and then all the extra things that you mentioned during this podcast. So much fun. I so love what you are doing. I love the vibrations that you give out. And I so love that you really have a appreciation for this and just really trying to help,
Thank you.
Really trying to help.
Yeah. I just want everybody to have what they want. And for everybody, it's going to be a little different. So yeah, let's figure that out.
Yes.
Come work with me. We'll figure that out.
Thank you so much for being here. For those watching live or on the replay, check out leahcarey.com. Or did you say social media? Where are you at? Facebook,
Oh,
LinkedIn?
I'm at Good Girls Talk
Good
on
Girls Talk.
some of the networks.
Okay, awesome. We'd love to connect people here at the Her Nation community. Thank you so much for joining us here on Her Version. This community is expanding every single day and is filled with females who are striving to do better than they did yesterday. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. If you have an amazing story to share of struggle to triumph, be sure to reach out to me at herdnation.love. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I'm so grateful to be here sharing a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth and inspire others.